I guess you didn't get the memo, Bryce said, flashing that smug, lacoste smile of his while I stood there holding my travel folder like an idiot. The conference was yesterday. We're being exclusive now. The word exclusive hit like a slap made of crystal and condescension. Around us, 3 junior analysts froze mid-scroll, pretending not to hear but suddenly finding their shoelaces fascinating. I glanced down at the itinerary I had printed that morning. Hotel booked, flights confirmed, name badge prepped, and realized he'd pulled the plug behind my back. 12 years. 12 years of building this department from a supply closet next to the janitor's office to one of the top-performing grant compliance divisions in the region. And now I was being reduced to legacy noise, as he'd called me last week during a leadership huddle, loud enough for the HR girl with the lavender bangs to stop taking notes. He wanted me out of sight, maybe out of mind. But here's the thing about legacy noise, it echoes. Before we go any further, I've got to say this: if you're enjoying this story, do us a favor. Tap that subscribe button and toss a like our way. Over 90% of folks listen without subscribing, and trust me, our team runs on coffee, spreadsheets, and moral support. Plus, it drives the algorithm nuts when Donna gets the last word. Anyway, I stood there, silently folding my travel folder in half. My hands didn't shake, but I remember the satisfying crunch as the cardstock bent. Bryce was already turning his attention to Kelsey, his new chief of staff, who, from what I could gather, was qualified mostly through a suspicious number of likes on his beach volleyball posts. "You'll be briefing the DOE partners now," he said to her, handing over the binder I had built. The same one I'd reviewed, updated, and blessed with 3 rounds of compliance cross-checks. She nodded like a bobblehead, high on ambition and Red Bull, of course, happy to represent. Bryce clapped her shoulder. "You'll crush it." He didn't look back at me. He didn't have to. The message was clear: don't let the door hit you on the way out. And if it does, make sure it doesn't disrupt the view for our new blood. Back at my desk, the air felt stale. My inbox had 24 unread emails and 3 flagged from procurement about the same vendor code dispute. But all I could hear was the echo of his voice. Exclusive, like I was an off-brand handbag at a country club yard sale. I didn't reply to anyone. I didn't text my husband. I didn't go cry in the bathroom like Bryce probably hoped I would. I just opened my compliance logs. I clicked into the audit worksheet and created a new tab. I labeled it int bypass 0425. Then I started logging. Not the kind of logging you do for IT with ticket numbers and resolution dates. No, this was human logging. The kind where you record every shrug, every missing CC on an email, every meeting mysteriously moved to a room you weren't invited to. The kind of log you build quietly, patiently, waiting for the day it reads like a slow burn autopsy. Within a week, Bryce had made it clear: communication with federal grant officers was now going through him and his chosen team. That meant I was out. The woman who wrote the SOPs for our last $200 million in federal contracts, benched. He called it modernization. I called it a mistake. They scrubbed my name from the internal planning decks, canceled my one-on-ones with the DOE liaison I'd worked with for 5 grant cycles. Hell, even reassigned my ergonomic chair. Petty level was rising like a thermostat in a Florida attic. So I did what seasoned compliance officers do when their spines are made of steel and their patience is thicker than a quarterly budget binder. I kept going. On paper, I was business as usual. But behind every polite smile, every forwarded invoice, every thanks looped in reply, I was watching. Bryce didn't realize he was dealing with a woman who knew the difference between passive and silent. I wasn't angry. Not in a way he'd notice. I was precise. And when you're precise, you wait for the moment the system bends just enough for the trap to click shut. He thought I was background noise. But even background noise, when recorded, becomes evidence. The memo came in at 6:42 a.m., time-stamped like a middle finger. Subject line: streamlined protocols for federal communication effective immediately. It had that faux urgent tone corporate types love, like someone just invented compliance yesterday, and we should all be grateful for the PowerPoint baptism. Inside, Bryce had outlined a modernization framework that effectively ripped my department's authority out from under us. Any and all external correspondence with federal grant officers, auditors, liaisons, hell, probably even the janitor at the DOE, was now to be funneled through Kelsey, his chief of staff. Kelsey, the woman who once asked if our grant allotments came pre-approved like credit cards. The new policy chart was color-coded. Bryce loved a chart like a cat loves a laser pointer, and it showed a perfect hierarchy. Him at the top, Kelsey beneath him, and then a handful of compliance support pods, which was apparently what we were calling experienced federal compliance officers now. Pods like peas or parasites. There was no mention of me by name. I read the memo 3 times, closed it, opened it again. Then I did what I'd already learned to do. I opened my audit workbook. Tab 2, COM Protocols 0426. Line by line, I began logging the exact time of the memo. The recipients list, I wasn't CC'd until someone manually forwarded it to me. The revised org chart, and a screen cap of Kelsey's Slack post saying, "Just a heads up. Bryce wants to own all comms now, smiling face with smiling eyes with a little party hat emoji. That emoji would later become the funniest piece of evidence I'd ever use. I called no meetings. I didn't storm into his office. I simply documented, because here's the thing. Compliance isn't about who yells loudest. It's about who has the receipts when the music stops and someone's holding the wrong bag of money. Later that day, Bryce did what he always did when he wanted to mask a power grab and faux teamwork. He called a town hall, made us all stand in the conference room with sad Costco muffins while he paraded out his vision of next-gen Noventa. He used phrases like agility pipeline and cross-pollination of function sets and narrative synergy, which meant absolutely nothing, but made enough people nod so he felt validated. Then came the piece de resistance. Legacy systems and legacy voices have served us well. But it's time for a forward-facing architecture. That means streamlined communication, singular branding, and one point of federal contact, Kelsey. He gestured to her like she was the Statue of Liberty. She beamed. I didn't blink. I just tapped a note into my phone and added another line to the workbook. Bryce announces Kelsey as federal liaison. DOE contact unnotified. When the Q&A started, a junior compliance analyst asked, "What happens if the grant officer needs to speak directly with the named officer?" Bryce smiled like a snake oil pastor. That won't be necessary anymore. Our goal is to abstract the legacy bottlenecks and create fluid points of trust. Translation: we'll tell the feds what we want, and they'll believe it because Kelsey uses Canva. Back at my desk, I opened the federal grant portal, scanned through our active programs, found the largest one, the $50M multi-year tech sustainability grant, saw my name still listed as the named officer, still tagged for physical sign-off on Section 6B. I clicked nothing. I didn't change the name, I didn't delegate it, I just took a screenshot. Saved it in a private folder labeled G6B Original named 0426. That evening, while everyone else was sipping cheap wine at Bryce's Innovation Hour, I stayed late, rechecked the auto-signature settings on the disbursement portal, unenrolled my account from automated signature queue, took a deep breath. Then I walked past Bryce's office. He was laughing loudly, gesturing with an empty glass. Kelsey was nodding too hard. Someone said, "You're gonna kill it at the conference." Bryce winked and said, "We're rebranding compliance from caution tape to confetti, baby." And that was the moment I knew this wasn't modernization. It was a controlled demolition. But I wasn't trapped in the rubble. I was watching from the fire exit, holding the blueprints. The invite vanished from my calendar like it had never existed. No cancellation notice, no reschedule, no Slack ping, just gone. One minute I was prepping the quarterly grant planning deck for a meeting I'd led for over a decade. The next, I was refreshing Outlook like a confused intern wondering if she'd imagined the whole thing. I asked Kelsey casually. "Oh," she said, "overcaffeinated and underqualified." Bryce thought it'd be better, optics-wise, if we presented a younger, more agile team to the funding consultants. You know, just to signal transition energy. Transition energy, I repeated like it was a real phrase. "Don't take it personally," she added, sipping something green and overpriced. "He just wants to align faces with where Noventa is going, not where it's been." I nodded, didn't argue. Just smiled that empty, professional smile that says, "I've been insulted before. You're not special." I walked back to my desk and opened the meeting deck, still shared with me. Still the same color scheme I'd fought to keep standardized last fiscal year. But now my section, Grant Renewal Strategy, had been replaced with a slide titled Unified Leadership Vision. Bryce's face was front and center, next to a blurry stock photo of people shaking hands over laptops. He was branding himself as the money magnet. And in a way, he was. He could sell an empty envelope if you slapped disruption on the label. The board loved him because he wore shoes that cost more than my monthly mortgage and knew how to speak in declarative sound bites. But he didn't know the system. Not the one I built, not the real one, so I opened my compliance binder. The physical one, black leather, tabs like battle scars. Inside was a printed copy of our DOE grant agreement, the $50 million one. Section 6B, still intact, still naming me as the authorized signer on disbursement renewals. Still requiring physical attendance and verification for the grant's Year 2 unlock. There was an internal system tied to this, called dSign, that allowed for automated approvals once the named officer was validated. It was meant to save time. For years, I'd used it to streamline quarterly approvals. Trusted it, trusted them. But not anymore. I logged into dSign, scrolled to my enrollment settings, and clicked Revoke Autosign Privileges. Confirmation prompt blinked. "Are you sure? This action will require manual reauthorization for future sign-off requests." Yes, it took 2 seconds, but it felt like flipping a breaker in a basement no one had visited in years. From this point forward, if Bryce wanted that next disbursement, he'd need me physically, manually, with government ID and a signature that matched the original records. There was no workaround. Not unless they amended the grant, which required 6 months of legal and 3 letters of explanation. In other words, not gonna happen. I didn't announce it. I didn't even add a note to the tracker. Just closed the tab and went on with my day. Later that week, I heard Bryce speaking to the board over Zoom. He didn't know I was on the call. My name was buried on the CC list, and no one questions a muted rectangle in these meetings anymore. This next quarter is critical, he said, voice syrupy, and we're positioned to be the face of forward-thinking federal tech innovation. I've personally led the redesign of our grant-facing workflows, including direct alignment with DOE funding cycles. Direct alignment. Like I hadn't built the roadmap 3 years ago while Bryce was still peddling SAW vaporware to defense contractors who couldn't spell procurement. The board asked no tough questions. Why would they? Bryce had momentum, veneers, and a well-rehearsed smirk, and the one person who could call him out wasn't invited. But what he didn't realize was that every move he made, from cutting me out to posturing for the board, parading his chief of staff like a novelty liaison, was building a case. Not legally, not yet, but structurally. Because when you tear out the foundation of something carefully built and replace it with charisma and buzzwords, the house doesn't collapse all at once. It just starts to creak. And eventually, if you're lucky, it waits until you're inside, lights on, pouring champagne for investors before it falls through the floor. So I went back to work. Quiet, focused, watching. And Bryce, he just kept climbing the ladder, not knowing I'd already greased the rung. The first photo hit our internal Slack channel at 8:17 a.m. sharp. Bryce, flanked by two federal reps from the Department of Energy, all of them grinning like car salesmen who just closed a lease on a lemon. Kelsey stood in the background holding a ring light, adjusting Bryce's blazer so the Noventa logo peaked just enough to say, "We're official," but not enough to say we're desperate. The caption read, "Making moves at #Fed Tech Summit 2025, briefcase collision #NextGen compliance #Bryce means business." I stared at it for exactly 3 seconds. Then I minimized the window and went back to my audit log. The conference I wasn't invited to, the one Bryce had told me, was yesterday, Donna. And frankly, we're trying to be exclusive with outward-facing roles, was happening right on schedule. Not yesterday, not exclusive, just carefully curated to exclude one specific legacy voice. Namely me. I knew what this was. It wasn't about compliance. It wasn't even about strategy. It was about optics. Bryce wanted to show the board that he could reinvent Noventa's funding posture with the shine of a LinkedIn selfie and the right buzzwords. He thought if he looked the part, acted the part, and smiled hard enough at the people who held the purse strings, no one would notice the one person who made sure those strings weren't tangled. But the grants officers noticed. At 10:52 a.m., an email popped into my inbox. Not directly, of course, it came forwarded from an old DOE contact who had worked with me on the original grant. The subject line said, "Hey, quick question." The body was short. "Donna, we didn't see your named officer anywhere on site this morning. Was that intentional? Let us know if there's a change in designation or a reassignment form we missed." Craig was a by-the-book guy. Wore the same brown tie every Tuesday for 6 years. The fact that he was even emailing showed how off-script this whole circus had become. I hit reply, typed one sentence. I wasn't invited. Calendar invite was declined. That was it. No emotion. No explanation. No finger-pointing. Just the truth. I didn't CC anyone. I didn't forward it to HR or legal, but I knew Craig would. He'd file that email somewhere safe because that's what people like us do. We don't delete, we archive. We don't gossip, we document. That reply planted the first official flag on the timeline. The federal database now had a record that the named officer had not only been absent, but actively excluded. 20 minutes later, Kelsey posted another photo to Slack. Bryce shaking hands with the same DOE reps. The caption was worse this time, secured the bag. Moneylight, big things coming for Q3. That bag she was talking about, still frozen, still pending compliance review, still missing one essential element, my physical presence. I turned off notifications and made myself a fresh pot of coffee. By 1 p.m., my department was buzzing like bees trapped in a Coke can. The junior analysts were wondering if they'd missed something. One of them asked me, "So, is Bryce replacing you on the grant officially?" I smiled and said, "Only the DOE can answer that." By 3 p.m., the photos were circulating on LinkedIn. Bryce had made himself the face of Noventa's compliance future, shaking hands with people who assumed he had dotted all the I's and crossed all the T's. He hadn't, but I had. I opened the compliance dashboard and double-checked the D-sign logs. Sure enough, no sign-off recorded, no secondary delegate approval. The field for attending named officer was blank. The system had flagged the renewal as incomplete and marked it on hold awaiting validation. I screen captured the status, saved it. Then I went back to my audit tracker and created a new tab. Conference omission 0501, I logged the Slack photos. Timestamps, the DOE contact email, my reply. And finally, the grant system status, still pending, still unapproved, still tied to my revoked auto signature. The trap wasn't sprung, not yet, but the wire had been brushed, the bait tasted, the first paw resting gently on the trigger. Bryce was too busy posting photo ops and buying celebratory whiskey to notice. But the system noticed everything. The first crack didn't sound like a crack. It sounded like finance clearing its throat. Anyone know if Treasury's behind again? Someone mumbled in the break room, half laughing, spooning powdered creamer into a mug like they were digging a shallow grave. We were supposed to see first tranche funds by now, and Marcy's got vendor checks queued up like it's Black Friday. I didn't look up from my yogurt. Bryce had just breezed by my cubicle 50 minutes earlier, whistling, like a man who'd just been nominated for something. He had that glow people get when they've been shaking hands with important people and think they've absorbed some of the importance by osmosis. I heard him joke to someone in finance, probably just a delay. Bureaucracy moves at the speed of toast. Toast. Cute. What he didn't know or didn't care to know was that toast doesn't move. It sits and burns if you forget it's there. I opened my compliance log. No new updates, no emails, no internal tickets, just silence, peaceful, delicate silence. The kind you only get once the wrong person thinks they've won and stops watching the scoreboard. Kelsey, of course, was still posting motivational quotes in Slack. Teamwork is the fuel that allows common people to attain uncommon results. She paired it with a selfie in a Noventa hoodie and a gold star emoji. I wanted to reply with, fuel needs an engine. Right now. You're sitting in the parking lot humming. But I didn't. I just added a note in my side file. Finance inquired verbally disbursement lag, no escalation yet. Bryce dismisses publicly as standard DOE processing lag. That entire week felt like holding your breath underwater. No alarms, no alerts, just little bubbles of unease rising to the surface. I passed Bryce in the hallway twice, once he winked at me like we were in on a joke together. The second time, he clapped my shoulder and said, "Bet you're glad you didn't have to deal with all that conference chaos, huh?" I smiled, said nothing, kept walking. He thought I was relaxing in the shade while he roasted in the spotlight. But I wasn't resting, I was waiting. By Wednesday, procurement started asking questions more directly. We're getting soft nudges from a couple of subcontractors, one said, poking her head into the finance director's office. They're nervous. The last grant release came through 3 days earlier than this. Still, no one panicked. Bryce took a half-day Thursday to play golf with someone from strategy. I stayed late to cross-reference section 6B again. The compliance clause hadn't changed. My name was still there. The system still showed on hold awaiting manual validation. No alert sent yet, but the system didn't escalate until day 12. And today was day 8. I shut my binder and stared at the ceiling for a full minute. If there's a moment when a storm decides it's going to form, this was it. Quiet sky, warm breeze, clouds just starting to shape into something sharper. People forget how slow disasters start. They think it's all alarms and sirens and fire drills. But in the real world, it starts with an empty inbox. A missing line in a spreadsheet. A name left off a calendar. A too casual joke made by a man who thinks the rules only exist to keep other people in line. Kelsey came by my desk that Friday, bubbly as soda. Just a heads up, we're prepping a thank you to our federal partners post for socials. Bryce wants to tag DOE, but I couldn't find the right contact. You had someone over there, right? The brown tie guy? Craig, I said. You'll want to be careful about tagging DOE until funding posts. I frown on premature victory laps. Oh, she laughed. Totally, I'll make a note. But still, Bryce is confident, said we're in great shape. I nodded. Sounds like he has a plan. She left humming. I reopened my design log, no changes. Then I added a final note to the week's entry. Team proceeding under assumption of imminent funds. No queries to compliance. No system override attempts made. DOE status unchanged. Everything looked normal, which was exactly the problem. Subject, urgent DOE grant status release hold. Time, 7:04 a.m. Sender, Lauren Klein, internal audit recipients. Finance, legal, compliance. The email lit up our inboxes like a silent alarm no one had trained for. Just 6 words in the subject line, all caps, and 2 question marks, audit's version of a blood-curdling scream. The body was short, clinical. While reconciling the Q3 grant projection ledger, I noticed the DOE portal lists the disbursement status as release hold pending verification. We were expecting this to post last Friday. Can anyone confirm if this is a processing delay, or is there a compliance trigger we're not seeing? I sipped my coffee, didn't reply. The first response came from someone in finance, sounding a little too calm, probably just internal lag on their end. Treasury has been slower since the fiscal transition last month. Nothing flagged on our side yet. Lauren, bless her organized soul, replied with a screenshot of the grant portal status, zoomed and circled. This isn't a Treasury issue. The flag is on the DOE side. Grant is fully approved but being held for incomplete compliance certification. That doesn't happen automatically. Someone didn't sign off. The room got colder without anyone saying a word. And that's when the scramble started. Emails popped like microwave popcorn, kernels of panic dressed in professionalism. Anyone know who the current signatory is? Kelsey, did we get confirmation from Donna on that? Wait, wasn't Bryce handling the DOE contacts now? Can someone loop in legal? We need to resolve this before end-of-week Treasury draw. I minimized the thread, opened my compliance tracker, created a new tab, DOE release hold 0511 log timestamps, headers, attachments. Took another screenshot of the current portal status, unchanged. Still listed as named officer, D. Meechem, still marked awaiting manual sign-off. Kelsey finally replied to the chain, trying to sound authoritative and chill, the way people do when they realize they might be holding a live grenade. We're following up with DOE now. Pretty sure this is just a backlog in post-conference admin. Bryce already connected with our liaisons. We'll confirm shortly. Except Bryce wasn't on the thread. Bryce was, apparently, already en route to a breakfast with an innovation firm, per his assistant's auto-reply, currently out of office attending BizNext Labs' executive breakfast. Back by 10:30 a.m. Legal chimed in next, and their tone was decidedly less relaxed. Clarify, DOE funding disbursements are contingent on compliance verification by the named officer listed in the initial agreement. If that signature wasn't submitted, it is not a delay. It's a procedural block. By 8:12 a.m., the thread had 14 replies, 3 attachments, and at least 2 people in full defensive crouch. Someone tried calling Craig at DOE. He was in meetings. Of course he was. I sat at my desk, calmly finishing the monthly vendor reconciliation checklist. Highlighted a few duplicate entries. Flagged a travel reimbursement request that violated our per diem policy. Scheduled a routine system update. And in between, I watched. Watched them swirl and flail in the current they created, thinking they could swim through a federal system with buzzwords and borrowed authority. No one had asked me to fix it yet. No one had even asked me if I knew what happened, and I didn't volunteer. I knew the policy. I'd written the internal summary guide on Section 6B. It sat in a PDF folder labeled Read before signing that Kelsey had once asked me to TL.DR for the team. They'd chosen flashover form. Now the form was holding $50 million hostage. Craig finally emailed at 9:37 a.m. Our system shows this grant renewal as pending due to missing in-person verification by the named officer. Sent a clarification request last week. Still awaiting reply. And in that moment, that email, everything shifted. It was no longer a delay, it was a block. I printed Craig's email, stapled it to my monthly reporting packet, and quietly placed it in the outgoing tray for records. Then I updated my audit log. Line 14, system working as designed. The meeting invite hit my calendar with red font and a required tag, no subject. Just one word, emergency. Held in the 10th floor boardroom, a place I hadn't been asked to step into since Bryce started his regime of buzzwords and Instagrammable leadership. The kind of room where the air always smells faintly like dry erase markers and nervous money. I walked in 5 minutes early. Took a seat near the far end of the table. Not next to anyone, not at the head. Just in that quiet pocket where nobody expects you to speak until they need a scapegoat or a miracle. Bryce was already there, pacing, his jacket slung over a chair, sleeves rolled to the elbow in that desperate way men do when they want to appear both in control and overworked. Kelsey sat next to him, flipping through a folder like she thought she was auditioning for Netflix legal drama. Legal was there. Finance. 2 board members via video, 1 in person. And then, unexpectedly, Michael Cheng from E&Y Compliance Advisory. An external auditor. That was new. Michael nodded at me as I entered. I nodded back. Then Bryce cleared his throat and launched into his opening monologue with the energy of a man trying to outrun his own shadow. Thanks, everyone, for joining on short notice, he began, smiling like someone who thinks charisma can be notarized. I want to assure you we're treating the DOE disbursement hiccup with urgency. What we're looking at here is, most likely, a clerical issue, a procedural misstep during post-conference documentation. We've already reached out to DOE. This is just a temporary freeze, not a revocation. He paused, scanned the room for approval. No one nodded. Let's keep perspective, he added quickly. Compliance protocols are complicated, lots of moving parts. And frankly, some of our systems haven't caught up with how we've modernized our communication flow. Ah, there it was, the passive blame machine whirring to life. Some of our systems, how we've modernized. Translation, if something failed, it was the old way, not the new guy. Legal chimed in, tone dry as unbuttered toast. Bryce, to be clear, the federal agency has flagged this as a release hold due to noncompliance with Clause 6B. That's not clerical. That's contractual. Bryce didn't flinch, which is why I'm saying this is a miscommunication. We've been in touch with DOE. Once they understand the situation, our new point of contact, our updated workflows, I'm confident we'll move forward. I stayed silent. I wasn't here to rescue him. Finance leaned in. Bryce, do you have documentation showing DOE accepted a change in the named officer designation? We're now 13 days past expected funds. Our credit line is tapped. We've floated vendor payments on the assumption that money was inbound. Bryce glanced at Kelsey. She hesitated just a beat too long, then fumbled. We submitted an internal memo noting the structural change. It's possible that wasn't mirrored in their system yet. Mirrored, not filed, not accepted, not legally amended, just mirrored, like they were hoping DOE would look into a puddle and magically reflect their mistakes back as policy. Michael Cheng set down his pen. Let me save everyone a few hours, he said, his voice the kind that stops throat clearing mid-breath. The DOE doesn't mirror, they verify. And Section 6B is explicit. Funds are not to be released without in-person verification by the named officer of record. That record still lists Donna Meacham. All eyes turned to me. I didn't blink. Bryce tried to laugh like we were all just making a fuss over fine print. I mean, sure, technically, but let's be honest, Donna wasn't even at the conference. Now it was quiet. Board member Hash 2, the one with the gray mustache and the unfortunate Wi-Fi lag, leaned toward his mic. Why not? Bryce shifted. We made a strategic decision to showcase the new leadership model. Donna wasn't part of the outward-facing presentation team. We assumed the approval process would follow standard flow. Assumed, Michael repeated, with federal funding. Even the HVAC system sounded like it was holding its breath. I finally spoke. I wasn't invited, I said, calm. Even, my calendar invite was rescinded. I responded accordingly. Kelsey flushed. Bryce waved a hand. There was no intent to exclude. It was optics. You know how these conferences are. Michael held up a printed sheet. This is the response DOE has on file. One line, I wasn't invited. Calendar invite was declined. That response is now part of the compliance trail. The system automatically flags for manual review when the named officer declines an engagement required by grant conditions. I watched Bryce's throat work to swallow. Someone on the board asked, so, the delay is not technical? No, Michael said. The grant is frozen, not delayed. Frozen. And for a moment, there was only silence. A kind of silence that lives in the seconds before a very expensive ship hits a very well-marked iceberg. Bryce looked at me. I didn't smile, didn't smirk, just looked back. Because we both knew this wasn't a miscommunication. It was a miscalculation. The paper made the softest sound when Michael unfolded it, one crisp slide of cardstock across lacquered wood. It could have been a grocery list. But in that moment, it might as well have been a guillotine. He held it up without preamble, square between his thumb and index finger. This, he said, calm and cold, is the system-generated compliance log from the Department of Energy grant portal. It references Clause 6B. He let that land. No one moved, not Bryce, not Kelsey, not even the CFO, who had gone pale somewhere between the words frozen and revoked. Michael continued, his voice taking on that deliberate cadence auditors use when they want something on the record. Clause 6B of the grant agreement requires in-person verification by the named officer at the designated federal compliance presentation. It is not a formality. It is not advisory. It is a legal precondition to disbursement. He turned the paper around so the room could see. This is the named officer's calendar response, he said. Marked, declined, time-stamped, verified. Triggered automatic hold on grant processing. DOE flagged it immediately. He placed the page on the table, face up, center stage. Silence rolled in like fog. The board chair, a sharp-eyed woman who hadn't spoken much until now, leaned forward. Donna, she said quietly, did you decline this? I didn't glance at Bryce. Didn't even shift in my chair. I wasn't expected to attend, I said. Even, unbothered, not passive, not vengeful, just precise. Bryce let out a short laugh. It cracked halfway out of his throat. Okay, but we delegated, obviously. Kelsey handled the presentation. We made sure everything was covered. This wasn't malicious, it was procedural. A simple restructuring of who handled what. Michael raised an eyebrow. You can't delegate the legal identity of the named officer without a DOE-approved amendment. Was that filed? Kelsey opened her mouth, closed it. Bryce's hands started to shake. No, but Donna's still on the payroll. She's part of the team. We assumed that covered it. The board chair blinked slowly. You assumed? Bryce nodded too fast. Yeah, I mean, it's compliance, right? Red tape. It's always a little fuzzy. Legal cleared their throat so hard it sounded like a warning shot. It's not fuzzy, they said. It's federal grant law. Michael tapped the document with one finger. DOE's systems don't care about internal assumptions. They care about procedure. Clause 6B is binary. Either the named officer is present or the funds do not release. That line, I wasn't invited, is now part of the official audit trail. The CFO finally found his voice. It wasn't loud. How much is at risk here? Michael answered without looking away from the printout. $50 million. The entire next year installment. And depending on DOE's review of this omission, the remainder of the grant could be at risk as well. The room felt smaller suddenly. Tighter. Bryce looked at me now, full on, like I might have an escape hatch hidden under my chair, like I'd toss him a rope if he asked nicely. I said nothing. I'd already spoken, the paper did the rest. It sat there, silent, damning, factual. The one piece of evidence that didn't shout, didn't accuse, didn't argue, just confirmed. A single page declined. Bryce reached for a water bottle with fingers that barely obeyed him. Donna, he said, voice raw now, you could have told us. I finally looked at him, and you could have invited me. The board chair closed her folder, not loudly, just with finality. Outside, the afternoon sun caught the edge of the blinds and threw thin shadows across the table. For the first time in weeks, I let myself exhale. Not a smile, not yet, but almost. The HR announcement came in the form of a single line buried in the morning bulletin. Effective immediately, Bryce Langston has been placed on administrative leave pending internal investigation. No fanfare, no explanation. just a quiet vacuum where arrogance used to sit. His name vanished from the Slack directory within the hour. His badge deactivated. His corner office dimmed. Lines drawn like a curtain had fallen on a one-man show that ran too long and cost too much. Kelsey was reassigned to strategic partnerships, which everyone knew meant exile with Wi-Fi. Legal took over communications with the DOE, issuing a formal acknowledgement of noncompliance and requesting resubmission protocols for the frozen grant. No one tried to spin it anymore. The facts were what they were. The system had held. And I, just by not interfering, had let it. 3 hours after the HR note, I got a text from the board chair's assistant. Hi Donna, are you available this week for a private session with the compliance subcommittee? We'd like to discuss potential advisory support during this transitional phase. Advisory support, I knew what that meant. They were calling the fire marshal after ignoring the smell of smoke for a month. I responded, available, let me know time and terms. The next morning, I walked into the boardroom, not through the back hallway like before, not through the side entrance labeled compliance support. Straight through the main doors. No badge swipe needed. The room looked different now, or maybe I did. The panic had faded into procedure. Legal sat ready. Finance looked bruised. The board chair stood and shook my hand like I was a surgeon about to assess a patient someone else tried to fix with duct tape and charm. I want you to lead the resubmission, she said. The DOE made clear that if we get this right, transparently, by the book, they'll consider releasing the funds next quarter. But only if the compliance oversight is, quote, trustworthy and unambiguous. I let that hang for a second, then nodded. I won't come back as staff, I said. No org chart, no reporting chain. She didn't flinch, understood. I'll need autonomy, direct contact with DOE, full access to internal audit tools. You'll have it. And compensation aligned with risk level. She smiled. Name your rate. That's how I returned, not as a disgruntled employee, not as a rescued relic, but as the one person they couldn't afford to exclude anymore. They gave me the project room on floor 9, the one with the real sunlight and the glass walls. A few hours later, the CFO joined me, still rubbing his temples like he was nursing a hangover made of bad assumptions. You've got the lead, he said. Just tell me what you need. I slid a binder across the table. Slimmer than Bryce's pitch decks, no fluff, just the roadmap. A full compliance reset, updated protocol language, DOE liaison re-engagement scripts, a documented timeline of the breach and the patch strategy. I didn't highlight the parts where Bryce's decisions had triggered failure. I didn't need to, the system had already done that for me. The CFO flipped to the first tab, his jaw tensed, then relaxed. This, he said, this is what should have been happening all along. I didn't agree, didn't disagree, just nodded. Outside the room, Noventa hummed on. Emails flew, meetings buzzed, people rebooted. But in here it was quiet, and I liked it that way. I didn't ask for an apology. I didn't need a plaque or a promotion or a performative gratitude post on the company feed. I just wanted the truth to sit where it belonged, out in the open. Verified, signed. The rules had always been enough. They only failed when people assumed they were optional. So I leaned back in the chair, my chair now, and watched as the first lines of my roadmap got typed into the system. The house hadn't burned down. It had just learned who knew where the exits were. You're the real MVPs of the office jungle. Thanks for watching. Smash that subscribe button, or the coffee pot might just forget your next brew.